For the next 3 weeks in this course, you're going to be focused on developing your program proposal in 3 parts. And I find that students start to get a lot of anxiety about this portion of the course, but I want to reassure you that we are not looking for perfection. You will have the opportunity for each part, parts 1, 2, and 3, to submit a draft. You will get feedback from me and feedback from your peers, and then you will have the opportunity to submit the final version. Even after submitting that final version of parts 1, 2, and 3, you will then have another week to submit the full proposal all together, and you can still make edits. And so, really want to reassure you that perfection is not what I'm looking for. I want you to learn and be reflective and have the opportunity to contribute to your peers with giving feedback. And being able to receive feedback is also an incredibly important skill for social workers. So please do keep that in mind as you are working through developing a program or funding proposal. And for some of you, I know this is your first time. So be kind to yourselves and rely on the readings and the templates, but also feel free to ask me any question. No question is too big or too small. So for part 1, please do refer to the Brody and Nair books, chapters 8 and 15 for this. But also you have Google at your disposal. So if you need examples of logic models and statements of need, I really encourage you to also use those resources as well. You're going to be focusing on creating a statement of need, goals and objectives, and then a logic model for this part 1 of your program proposal. And then for your response post, you're going to be giving feedback to your peers. And you'll see in the announcements, you have the same partner now for weeks 3, 4, and 5. And when you provide your critique to your peer, I want you to assume the role of a funder or a funding agency. And would you consider your peer's program proposal adequate enough to consider giving them a grant? Would you fund them? What are the areas that they need to add to or strengthen? And so I want you to also be able to receive that feedback from your peers. And so that's how we'll be proceeding with this week. Now, in terms of the statement of need, um, let's say I'm going to use a housing example like I did in my previous video. Let's say that you are working for a housing authority and you've identified an unmet need that they don't have a crisis or conflict response team. So in your introduction, which is your summary of need and proposed solution, you simply want to describe, what is that unmet need? What doesn't exist in the program um, that you want to see funded? And why is that important to the organization that you're speaking of, to the population that you're serving, to the role that you're playing as a social worker? Why should this be funded? And so that could be anywhere from, 5 to 6 sentences, just really setting up the context for this. Your next section in the introduction is providing empirical evidence. And so this is where I want you to use key sources and talk about, you know, why does public housing authorities, do other ones provide crisis response teams? Maybe there's evidence that that practice actually is beneficial and helps sustain residents in housing for longer. Maybe it helps, not only residents, but maybe it supports property managers and leasing agents and makes the whole system work a little bit more effectively. So you want to try and find that empirical evidence about the thing that you're proposing, the program that you're proposing. And then lastly, organizational context. You want to be able to provide, what is happening in the organization that makes this an unmet need. So perhaps there are, housing conflicts has increased by 30% over the past 3 years. So again, what is happening in that specific organization that you're working in? You can use sources for this. You can also use informational interviews or a quick conversation with another program manager or social worker is all relevant sources. Just please make sure that you include them in your reference page. Also, with organizational context, maybe there's a mission of the organization to ensure that evictions go down. Um, that the property is well taken care of. Maybe there's a commitment from the leaders to have a trauma informed practice. So all of those are also related to organizational context. And then you'll see in the template that you have a statement of need box. Basically, that is your elevator pitch. So you have 3 sections that are pretty well fleshed out of your summary of need and the proposed solution, your empirical evidence, and then your organizational context. And I want you to summarize that in a 30-second elevator pitch, so maybe 3 to 4 sentences within that box. So that's what you'll be doing there. And then your second section, I want you to identify goals and objectives. So let's say you have this crisis team that you want to have funded. You've demonstrated that there's evidence that this kind of solution works. The organizational context demonstrates that it's needed. What are your goals for the crisis team? Let's say that, and I want these to be SMART goals, so something that is timely and measurable, relevant, and you'll see this in your reading this week. An example of a SMART goal is that through weekly crisis team responses, you will see lease violations go down by 15% within the first year. So there is a clear, measurable objective. The measure is that you'll see something decrease by 15%, and then there's a clear time frame within 1 year. That is also, in addition to being, measurable, it's relevant to what you are seeking to do, and it's also achievable, which is important. And then let's say that the evidence shows that when you have these crisis teams, it has an impact on reducing violence. And so maybe there is an increased feeling of safety that you want to see. And so because it is a feeling of safety, you want to be sure that you have a mechanism of being able to measure that. But let's just say that you want to ensure that that residents feel more safe and that there's an increased feeling of safety by 25% within 3 months. So again, as you think about these goals and objectives, please make sure that they are all SMART, measurable, and there's a time frame associated with them. And then your last portion for this part 1 is to create a logic model. This is where you are thinking through, okay, I have the grant money. What are your inputs, your activities, your outputs, and then your objectives or outcomes? And that last column, your outcomes column, should also be SMART, measurable objectives that have a time frame. So for inputs, you want to think about the people, the resources that you need to make this crisis team actually a reality. So who needs to be involved? Do you need computers? Do you need do you need staff? Maybe you need a property manager, social service coordinators. Think about those inputs that you need to actually make that program take place. And then what are the activities? Are there going to be weekly meetings? Are there going to be regular referrals to the crisis or conflict team? Are there going to be referrals for resources to mental health services or domestic violence services or to healthcare? So think about those activities that would be happening on a recurring basis, whether it's also, there might be observational activities taking place. There may be teaching. There may be meetings taking place. There might be regular checkpoints with every resident. Outputs are what you are going to see be produced as a result of the program. So, these can also be measurable. Maybe every month you would have seen 30 crisis conflicts be resolved That's an output of having a crisis response team. Maybe you see 25 referrals being made every week. So again, you are essentially making these up, but they should be thoughtful and related to what you are trying to solve in the organization. And lastly, the outcomes will be directly related to what you've developed above in the second section around goals and objectives. Maybe you want to see I forget what I said, 25% increased sense of safety, and maybe a 15% increase in, or a reduction in the number of lease violations, for example. So, this does take time and careful consideration as you work through these, but this is the value that you will bring as a social worker to an organization as you're thinking about the gap that's not being met, where clients are having serious challenges. If you think back to Anita and the kinds of services her and her family needed, but there were barriers in place, and so you're thinking about how to remove those barriers. And when you design a new program that you get funded, that logic model is incredibly important. You are thinking through, what do you need to make this happen? What are the activities that would take place on a routine basis? What is the output of those activities it's essentially the benefit that the client is going to see. And then the outcomes are the longer term improvements or changes that you're going to see within the organization that have a direct impact on clients. So when you choose something that you're passionate about, when you choose an organization that you are currently working in or that you've worked in the past, my hope is that these different variables start to come together for you. I wouldn't say easily, but that they start to make sense. This is directly macro level practice, and so I hope that you, while you may struggle a little bit, I hope that you really see the value of this assignment. And please get in touch with me if you have questions about any aspect of the part one of your proposal.